What's up guys, Pokémon TCG here, and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today guys, we're going to be trying something a little bit different, and that is, I'm trying out a new version of my channel mascot. For those of you who are not aware, this is Kip. He's actually been the channel mascot ever since I changed the channel to Pokémon TCG around 2.5 years ago. And he's gone through two different iterations so far. You're looking at version 2.0, but today I'll be showing off version 3.0, which you'll see on screen now. And as you can see, he's a little bit more cartoony. He's got a bit more of like a friendly vibe to him, and also he's got like a PNG. He's basically a PNG tuber. And going forward, I think I'm gonna start using him more as like a commentary sort of character, just kind of like as a visual for my commentary, both when I'm just doing like rant videos like this one or for gameplay. But just I would love to hear your thoughts about what you think about him, just aesthetically, and if he's like a good fit for the channel, honestly. But yeah, with all that out of the way, let's talk about Budew. Yeah, we're doing an entire video on this.
Before we get started, I would quickly ask to see if you're subscribed. I put a ton of effort into planning and making these videos, which can get tough sometimes due to me being a college student. Subscribing helps support me and my channel, and it allows me to make more videos like the ones you're currently watching. And if you want to help support my channel even further, consider becoming a member. With 3 different tiers to choose from, you'll get access to my videos early, get exclusive behind the scenes updates, you'll get creative inputs on new videos, and more. Every member will also be featured in the credits of every single one of my videos. Thank you so much for your support so far. Now, let's get back to the video.
For those of you who are unlucky enough to have been paying attention to my Twitter page, or if you know me locally, you'll know that I've ranted about this card for weeks now, because this card is ridiculous and disgusting. Now, at first glance, you might be like, oh, what? This is a cute little Budew. How could you ever hate this card? It's got 30 HP, and it does 10 damage. And yeah, trust me, this looks really stupid. This video in its entirety is incredibly dumb to make. But that's why I made the title so ridiculous. Like, how a 30 HP Pokemon, or 30 HP Budew, I haven't really decided on the title yet. How a 30 HP Pokemon is basically going to threaten the entire game. And it's all thanks to that attack, that 10 damage attack. Because if you read underneath the 10 damage, it says, during your opponent's next turn, they cannot play any item cards. Now, this is an incredibly broken effect that's usually reserved for Pokemon that have a little bit of setup required. And I've compiled a list of them here, and I think you know what? I think it's important that we look at the comparisons first before we talk about, like, there's basically talk about the other cards, their significance in the game, and then we can hop into the conversation about Budew and why it's worse than the other ones. So, to start out, we have Seismitoad EX, which I, unfortunately is not in PTCG Live because they're lazy and they don't want to add the full expanded format. So, Seismitoad EX is really one of the first item lock attackers. Of course, you had like Vileplume from like late XY, early Sun and Moon era that was like super annoying and prevented anyone from using items. But then you had like Seismitoad EX, and that created the Seismitoad Wars. And I am so glad I started playing right after that era ended, because I don't think I would be very interested if I couldn't play any of my decks ever. But Seismitoad EX basically was one of the most hated cards in the entire game. In fact, like, Tricky Jim has recently done a video about why, like, the most toxic cards in the game, and why Seismitoad is one of his, like, top picks for the most toxic cards in the game. And that was, like, really interesting to see, like, just the comparison of Seismitoad, which required a double colorless energy, to work in the first place, compared to Budew, which doesn't require any energy, but it still required a little bit of setup because you needed that, specifically your double turbo energy, and you ran 4 copies in your deck, but you still had to find it and be able to use it in the same turn. And it was also an EX card, so it gave you 2 prize cards if you knocked it out, and it had a lot of HP as well, so it's just a really annoying Pokemon, I guess. And Budew is almost like the exact opposite of Seismitoad in every way except of item lock. But we'll get back to Budew in a little bit. First, let's look at a couple of the other cards. Let's see. That's the most recent one. We'll come back to it. Let's start actually with the oldest example that I'm going to show off here, and that's Vikavolt V. Now, if a lot of you remember, back in like the early Sword and Shield days, like late Sun and Moon, early Sword and Shield days, and even past that, we had Vikavolt V, which never really saw a ton of, like, I want to say it didn't see a ton of play. It saw a lot of play, actually, in a lot of different, like, Pikachu and Zekrom decks. But, like, it never was its own standalone card. It was really more of just a tech card for, I guess there was a Vikavolt item lock deck at one point, but this mainly was, like, a tech card for electric type decks. And this was back in the day when we had access to, like, Electro Power, and we had Tapu Koko Prism Star. And basically, these two cards made Vikavolt really viable because you could hit huge damage with Item Lock and with that first attack Paralyzing Bolt. And you also could accelerate energies in order to be able to use it on the first turn. Of course, it required you to use Tapu Koko Prism Star or use Thunder Mountain Prism Star. Both were, I think, legal at the same time as this card. I'm not exactly sure about Thunder Mountain, if that actually rotated before this card came out, as my memories of this format are a little hazy. But essentially, what you need to know is that Vikavolt was pretty good just because it was like a techable card that you could slot in. And it wasn't necessarily its own deck until way later on. And even still, it was just kind of like a gimmicky deck that didn't always work. But it requires a decent amount of setup, as you can obviously see, and it's a bit of a costly Pokemon to begin with. Having only 210 HP in a format where 210 is very easy to one-shot, having a 190 damage attack also would discard 2 energy, not necessarily amazing, and then a 3 retreat cost, which was always the biggest problem with this card, was the 3 retreat cost. I remember getting stuck with Vikavolt quite a few times in this situation, and I was not a fan of it. But Vikavolt was accessible on turn 1. And one thing you're going to see as a constant for all of these cards, we'll come back to you, is that they're all you can all access all of them on the first turn of the game, and the same was for Seismitoad. But you have to do extensive setup for it. And that's the example that I have here with Pikachu V Union. Other than being my favorite V Union for, obvious reasons, this card, this fourth set of cards was essentially one of the gimmicky. This was like during a time where Pokemon was just really trying all the gimmicks that they could. Of course, we had V Unions, then we had V Stars with all their crazy powers. And really, V Unions never took off because they're just so expensive. They're obviously reminiscent of Pokemon Legend from back in the old days. But V Unions are actually 4 Pokemon. You have to get 4 Pokemon in the discard pile in order to summon it on your bench, and it gives up 3 prize cards. So it was just never really that easy or viable to set up. Most V Unions, the most popular one being Mewtwo, because it could actually just kind of heal, stall, and spread, because it was basically the most well-rounded. But Pikachu was always super gimmicky, and it wasn't exactly the best. I think looking back at all the V Unions, Pikachu was definitely the second best V Union. Greninja was also kind of up there as well, but I think Pikachu is kind of the second best because it had, specifically one of the reasons was because it had Item Lock. Item Lock, this effect was the Disconnect attack, which 150 damage during your opponent's next turn, they can't play any items. That's really good. 150 damage Item Lock is actually insane, and that is the highest damage Item Lock attack I think that the game has ever seen. But the problem ends up being, not only do you have to get all 4 V Union cards in the discard pile so you can summon it, you have to have bench space, you have to get Pikachu off the bench, and you have to power Pikachu up. Now, there were multiple ways to get Pikachu powered up. One of them was with Arceus V-Star, which was like the early version of the builds, like the very few builds that existed for this set of cards. And then the other one was more of like a turbo version with like Electric Generator, which was possible. You could actually possibly get the V Union in play on the first turn, but the odds of that were very, very low because it required so much setup. Like, it was a disgusting amount of setup to get this item lock online. And like, Pikachu had some pretty good attacks. It was also self-sufficient as well with the Union Gain attack, but it was just never viable because it was just a little too clunky and a little too slow. So that's why I brought it up here, because it is one of those cards that's actually like really good if it actually weren't just a gimmick card. And that's kind of what these two are, is more of like not necessarily gimmicks. The first one's gimmick. This one's more of just a tech card. This next one is its its own deck, really. And we've seen it a lot lately. When it first came out, Bayonet EX was a nobody card. It was like one of the most bulk EXs from the set, from Scarlet and Violet base, because nobody cared about it, really. And it has a very powerful attack. Everlasting Darkness for 30 damage, and obviously item lock, but this synergized well with cards like Radiant Alakazam, obviously Gardevoir EX. There's also the single prize Bayonet as well, to be able to retrieve like disruptive supporters, but there was also extra support added when Salvatore was released, which allowed you to evolve into your Bayonet EX on the first turn of the game. And since you only needed 1 energy for Poltergeist, or for Everlasting Darkness, excuse me, you could just use Bayonet right away. And of course that required a lot of setup, and a lot of people didn't want to go down that route. Even still to this day, if people still play Bayonet, they're playing it with the Gardevoir version, which is totally respectable and understandable, because why would you try and centralize your entire deck around the potential to get, basically the potential to get maybe your Salvatore in the first turn. But Everlasting Darkness, it's just been really good with Gardevoir, but that's again another, card that mainly has been a tech card, and it's an evolution, which does bring it down a bit. Obviously, again, just synergy is very good with a lot of other psychic types in the format right now, but it's an evolution, which is mainly its biggest drawback, and also it's an EX with very low HP, so it's had its fair share of issues, and that's why it's not really as big of a meta threat as it was a couple times, off and on again, right now, but it's still a very powerful card. And it's just another notable card. That's Budew. We want to talk about Venomoth. The last one I'm going to talk about is obviously the least meta out of literally all of them, I guess, other than Pikachu. I guess Venomoth and Pikachu are kind of on the same level of like just weird, where like you'll maybe see them at points, but they're never really actually there in the metagame. I guess Venomoth actually is even more than Pikachu was, but it's still not very good. Venomoth was also able to search out with you can also evolve with Salvatore, but you also had the Perplexing Powder attack for 30 damage, literally the same thing as Everlasting Darkness, but the opponent's active Pokemon is also confused, which was even better than any of the other item locks that I've talked about, if you're talking about just disruption in general. Because you confuse the opponent's active Pokemon, and if they actually can attack, they have to go for a coin flip on a 50-50 chance. And this is a really cool card. You paired this with Frostlass, but there was a very big issue because you had to evolve it, and the chances of you getting a Salvatore and getting Venomoth on the first turn were very low, especially with just the way the deck was structured. So it was basically safe to say that Venomoth was never truly meta relevant outside of like just these random online tournaments or playing on the ladder. So it's safe to say that Venomoth was just never that good. So what makes Budew so different? Why is Budew such a ridiculous card? Well, it's a basic Pokemon that requires 0 energy. It is literally the most brain dead and easy Pokemon to play in a deck. And because of this, it's so techable. Like, where Vikavolt required an electric type deck to support it, Budew does not require that at all. Budew can be put in any single deck that you want, and it's disgusting. So basically, because it's so universal, I basically witnessed Japan get overrun by this stupid card, and like in every single City League that I watched, I just saw a ton of Budews everywhere, and it was like, this is awful. This is the least interesting gameplay I think I've ever seen. And I'm just not a huge fan of the way that Budew was designed. Pokemon, like, in general, creatures who creates the cards for the game specifically and balances them competitively, has been on this, like, basically this trend of power creep, where we keep getting more and more powerful cards over time. Like, we had tag teams, then we went into VMAXs, and then we went into EXs with the same HP as VMAXs, back to 2 prizers. We went from 2 prizers with GX to 3 prizers with tag teams. We went to stay with 3 prizers with VMAXs, and then we took away the 3 prize liability, kept the HP, and now we've got stage 2 EXs, and we've kind of got this weird format where we're like in the twilight days of V-Stars, which have broken abilities or broken V-Star powers, and now we're heading into just an EX format, where the game is already naturally going to slow down. Because if you saw my last video on rotation, you'll know that we're losing a lot of key resources that allow decks to go turbo. Not like the Wreck-It Ralph reference, that's not what I'm talking about. But basically, Budew is just an extra slap in the face to, especially Stage 2 decks. The core aspect of using Stage 2 decks right now, especially like Charizard EX, the most popular deck, is that you go Rare Candy Pidgeot, and then you go Rare Candy Charizard, and yeah, it's like you go Buddy Buddy Boffin, or you go Precious Trolley on the first turn, then you go, next turn you just go, obviously, your Rare Candy combo, and then you're set up, and then Charizard's pretty good to go after that. The problem is that if you don't go second, which Charizard really has kind of wanted to go second for a long time now, just trying to bait the opponent into getting the first prize card or prize cards, it's just like, you look at Charizard as like this turbo, crazy, fast deck, because it has item cards and it relies heavily on rare candy to basically skip the evolution rule and say, yep, I'm gonna ignore that completely and play the 2 most broken Stage 2 EX cards in the entire game at the same time. And that's really where Charizard has thrived because of rare candy. In this Twitter thread that I made, I'm just going to reference it. I'm not really going to show it, really, because I think I can just kind of explain it. Jake Gearhart, who also made a similar thread to mine on Twitter, said that it's basically taking... Stage 2 decks would be taking a more Pokemon TCG Pocket sort of situation, where we actually have to fully evolve, and that kind of mitigates the broken, the sort of, I guess, the toxic culture of brokenness that Stage 2s have had recently. Obviously, Pidgeot is incredibly powerful, Charizard is ridiculously broken, and so is Dusknoir, and all 3 of them are incredibly oppressive on the rest of the meta. So Stage 2 decks do get hit hard by Budew, because if you miss out on the coin flip and you're forced to go first, there's only so much you can do by using your setup for Pokemon, because you'll get all your basics, and then Budew will hit you with an Itchy Pollen, and then poof, there goes your Stage 2s, and now you're going to have to spend turns you're going to spend extra time setting up these suboptimal Stage 1s, and that's somehow just, it's awful. Like, essentially, if you look at it, it's like, on one hand, yes, this slows down the oppressive deck in the form of Charizard specifically. And the same thing for Regidrago with Energy Switch. It shuts down the super hyper-aggressive turbo decks. But it creates its own problem specific, like, entirely. I like to think of, like, this analogy where it's like, imagine you're the Pokemon company, or, like, you're the competitive Pokemon TCG scene, and, like, you skin your imaginary hypothetical knee, and you need to take care of it, like, medical attention, essentially. And you need to address that wound. Well, let's say that Creatures is like, hey, I've got the solution for you. And so you're like, oh, okay, that's awesome. What do you got? Because we really need to fix this right now. And they're like, oh yeah, we've got this singular Band-Aid, and it's covered in acid. Here you go. Hope that makes you feel better. That's basically what Budew is. It's just contributing to the problem in a different way. Where it's a step in the right direction, obviously. Like, looking at the way that item lock is set up because of this, it slows the game down dramatically. But like I said earlier, we're already getting rotation soon anyways, and that's already going to slow down the game for most of the meta, which is going to lose a lot of the key resources that make them turbo, because we just have so many cards to choose from, to where Budew just becomes, like, salt on the wound, especially for Stage 2s. And one thing I really haven't mentioned yet is that one side can just continue to Budew you while they set up their own rare candy combos. Like, that's why you see a lot of decks right now that are, like, Dragapult on the ladder. Like, you'll see, specifically here, I'll show you, that's expanded. I don't want to be in the expanded part. Okay, here's the deck that I'm running right now. I'm playing Dragapult with Budew, because that's basically what I've been forced to play, is just playing Dragapult, because Dragapult farms Budew. And it's just like this rock, paper, scissors of like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to play Dragapult so I can beat the Budews. I'm going to play my own Budew so that way I can beat anything else. And then pray that I don't go against another Dragapult because they can destroy my Budews really early on. And because Dragapult's in this deck, I guess it's like really good for spread. And it's a good way to get Dragapult back into the game. Dragapult's been on this like weird, sort of like fringe part of the game where it's like, just outside of the meta, like just outside of being really good. And we've seen, obviously, Dragapult has been disruptive with the Iron Thorns version, but at least with the Iron Thorns version of Dragapult, you can use your item cards. And like you can actually gust around Iron Thorns or turn off its abilities with Canceling Cologne, which is impossible thanks to Budew. Another thing about Budew that's incredibly powerful is that it's a basic Pokemon. So that it's just a regular basic single prize Pokemon where you're kind of forced to knock it out at some point because you need to take that prize card off the Budew. I don't know, maybe sometimes you can just skip out on the Budew and avoid it the rest of the game. But it's a free pivot, it's an item lock card, and honestly your opponent wouldn't mind just sitting behind Budew forever in a lot of cases, because they know you can't do very much with just playing the game slowly and suboptimally, because they can just sit behind Budew, set up their own field, and then they'll go up with all their broken stuff, like even Hydreigon EX, and then they'll just completely board wipe you, because they take advantage of your slower start with Budew specifically. And, it's just like this weird, that's really what, like, if I could use one word to describe how Budew's gonna affect the meta, it's just weird. It's awkward. It's gonna make stream games awkward. It's gonna make it boring. Honestly, it's gonna make the game a lot more boring. You're gonna just be sitting behind Budews forever. I've even seen people do like what's been known as Budew Wars, which is basically you'll just keep Budewing each other over and over again. And I've even seen like Trust Your Pilot and For the Win play quad Budew, quad Frostlass, or like 3 Frostlass. And I've seen, like, Dusknoir versions as well, where it's just, you play Dusknoir, you play Budew, you play Blood Moon Ursaluna, and boom, that's your deck. This is such a boring deck. Like, why would anyone want to, A, play this deck, and B, why would anyone, especially on live, want to stick around and play against it? It's just so annoying, because it's like, oh, I'll just use some of the most broken cards in the game, while you can't do anything, because that's just how this card is designed. It's essentially like a wall. It's a flimsy wall. It's literally a tiny little plant that you can punt. Like, if you physically saw this Pokemon, it is 8 inches tall, meaning that this would be a very easy Pokemon to deal with. But in the trading card game, this thing is a monster. This thing is not unstoppable, but like a very irritating beast of a card. It's got an itchy pollen attack. No, that thing ain't itchy. That thing is the irritating. And I am just not ready for this card to completely change the way we play the game. Honestly, I really want a slower game. I really do. Because having a slower game allows for more creativity. Right now, we're in a point in the game where the turbo has consumed the meta so badly to where creativity is stifled. Creativity has been shut off because of the fact that you're playing against these oppressive decks like Charizard, Regidrago. Basically, the meta has just gotten very, not unhealthy. There are a healthy amount of decks in the game right now, but it's just always going to be dominated by the same few decks over and over and over again. Because that's just how those decks are designed. They always have the best cards, they have the best combos, and that really just shuts off any reason for you to play something else. Like, if you guys watch the San Antonio Regionals, you'll remember on day 1 that there was a Conkeldurr deck that was really cool and was actually undefeated going into that streamed match, but it lost because it was against a deck that was just arguably better because it was just more broken cards. Once again, this is the single prize argument that I'm not going to get into, unlike why single prize decks don't really work anymore. It's just because the deck, or like the meta is so turbo and so overpowered and favored towards these big EX and V-Star Pokemon to where there's just no chance for other Pokemon or ingenuity to really exist. Budew is a way to slow the game down. And whether you see it as healthy or not, I see it as absolutely not, obviously. It's still a card that will ultimately make the game slower. And that's just the situation that we're in right now. Clearly, this deck was designed to stop the turbo use of things like Dusknoir and Togekiss, and kind of the Stage 2 thing, we've already talked about it. But it causes other decks to start taking the hit, essentially, because this card affects everyone. You see decks like Cloth Terapagos, which is already on the decline, get bodied by Budew because all of a sudden you can't use your Precious Trolley. You can't use these cards in order to set up your board, and that's just really unfortunate. Like, basically, if you get a bad start and then you get Budewed, it's just extra bad for you, and it's just not very fair or fun. It's like, if the Pokemon Company, or if creatures saw the meta and turbo, like that, basically the acid analogy that I gave, they took it too far. The fight fire with fire is always such a horrible idea, because they've done the same thing with Drapion V and Kyurem. Yes, I will continue to find ways to complain about Drapion V, okay? It's like they take these counters a little too directly. They make them too ridiculous to where, like, you can clearly see that they want things to change, but they're too blunt in how they do it. And that's what just creates these super unhealthy cards for the game. And whereas, like, Drapion was super unhealthy against Mew, I mean, that makes sense. Mew was a dominant deck for a long time. Kyurem came at a time where it just was slotted into Regidrago, and that was it. It was never really used by itself. Budew affects everyone, and is like the most unhealthy way to create an item lock, basically an item lock situation. If, let's just say, if Budew required 1 energy to use Itchy Pollen, this card would be perfect. Honestly, I think this version of Budew, if it had the attack cost of 1 energy, it would be super balanced, and I think it would honestly be the perfect answer to the game, because it actually does require you to go out and search for things, and there's a way to counter it too. I've been playing in every single Stage 2 deck that I'm playing right now. I'm playing Pokemon League Headquarters, which attacks that used by basic Pokemon cost 1 colorless energy more. And basically, this is so that way, if I go first, there's a chance for me to place down League Headquarters, and so I can't get Budewed on the next turn, or at least the opponent is forced to find an energy card or commit their energy card to their Budew, instead of just being able to go, oh, I placed down Budew and Dreepy, I attach to my Dreepy, and I use Itchy Pollen, it's your turn. And next turn, that's going to be a Dragapult with both energies attached, and I'm just going to absolutely obliterate you. And that's just kind of like, League Headquarters is a perfect counter to that card. There's also a Cacnea that a person on Twitter here said was a good idea on, like, maybe. It was Lucas from sorry, I'm looking real quick. From Poland. Sorry, Lucas from Poland basically was saying that you can use Cacnea, which has the counterattack Quills attack. Here, let me show you which one I'm talking about. Cacnea. There we go. This card even could work. I'm just going to quickly add it to my deck. I'm not actually going to play the deck. Yes, I know. But this Cacnea, with the counterattack Quills ability, you can place down a Cacnea in the active spot, use a counterattack Quills as a deterrent for Budew, because it actually would knock out the Budew if the Budew used Itchy Pollen, which is kind of cool. Honestly, it's a very innovative way to like address the situation, but it's such a gimmicky card, and it never works outside of the Budew situation to where it's just like a viability. And that's really where Budew is. Like, every single time you look at a potential counter for Budew, it's either Budew can respond very easily by attaching an energy, bumping the stadium, or just like gusting up another Pokemon. It's very easy for Budew to just counter the counters. And that's something that we've seen time and time again, is that the counter to the counter doesn't always work. And Budew is made, like, if you're trying to counter Budew, it's infinitely worse because of the fact that it's can be used on the first turn of the game if you're going second. And you shut off item cards, which are crucial to how the game is played. Now, eventually, you're going to have to stop playing Budew if you're playing a non-quad Budew deck, because you actually like need to take your prize cards and win the game. But it's for those first few turns that really slow things down for one or both sides, just creating a super painful situation for everyone involved. And I'm just not a fan of the way that this card was designed. And like, I can get people excited for how this card will kind of make things hopefully a little bit slower, so that way you can kind of catch a breath. But honestly, this card's just so boring. Whoever designed this, can you please design better cards? Like, in the future, just add the 1 energy. That's all I ask. Just added if you just would have added an energy cost of 1, this would be a perfectly designed card, and I would have nothing to complain about. But it's because it's just exactly like the way it is right now. That's why I don't like it. And it's just a not healthy card for the game. It's a step in the right direction, but we took 2 steps back. It's like, you want to advance the game in a healthy way to slow it down, but you're actively making things worse for everyone involved just by having this card printed in the first place. So, yeah, that's really my rant on Budew. I know that I didn't really address the positive as much as I wanted to, but I feel like there are definitely positives for this card. It definitely will help some decks that are struggling, but it just also, once again, creates a whole bunch of other issues for everyone involved, and I'm just not really excited for this card to be everywhere for at least a little bit. We might see it fall off eventually, but I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys enjoyed the new model, and I hope that you guys keep your sanity with this Budew. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit of a pain getting into things. Who knows? Maybe Budew will be a fail card, and we will see how awful it truly is. But as it stands right now, it's just not a good card. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, God bless, have fun. We'll see you out there, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all so much for watching.